So all day, Thursday and Friday of this past week, I was participating in a board retreat for the Bexley Seabury Seminary Federation. This is a board that I've served on for a couple of years now, and that's gone well. But there's another member of that board whom you will all be familiar with, and her name is Bishop Catherine Waynick, our own bishop. Also serves on that board, and she's been there with me for a couple of years as well. All that's gone pretty well. Up until Thursday afternoon. One of my greatest fears about serving on a board with my bishop was finally realized. The speaker was up in the front of the room going on and on about his latest book, and I looked over and I could see that she was kind of lost in thought, and she was clearly sort of trying to work through some issue in her mind. And then she suddenly looked up and spotted me and smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you the new chairperson of the Diocesan Commission on Global Missions, me. So anyway, I apologize in advance if my sermon illustration today seems a little off the mark maybe, but I'm in this mindset of the last couple of days of thinking all things global. So hey, did you know that along the Ivory Coast in West Africa, there's this huge, ginormous cathedral? No, just play along. No, we didn't know that. Okay, thanks. You're helping out here. Okay. It's the cathedral known as the Basilica of Our Lady of Peace, and it is said that by appearances, it looks like a giant pearl rising up from the squalor of all the poverty that surrounds it. The Basilica has been listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest church in the world, surpassing even the previous record holder, which for centuries has been St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. This new basilica, this new cathedral, has an area of 333,000 square feet. It stands 518 feet high. That's like nearly a 50-story building. Now, granted, not everyone was entirely pleased with the construction of this cathedral. I would imagine particularly those in the Vatican. The good people of this West African nation wonder why on earth it was that their dictator, Felix Boigny, wanted to memorialize himself in such a lavish way. He definitely has that sort of go big or go home mentality, I guess. But especially in the midst of so much poverty. I mean, the annual combined income, household income, for the Ivory Coast in that area is $650 a year. So it seems to me that such a grand basilica costing $300 million maybe was a little bit over the top. But the problem isn't just the size of the building or the ornate architecture. Really, the biggest problem is that this massive cathedral located in this poverty-stricken area, for the most part, remains empty. There are about 350 persons who are registered members of this congregation, though very, very few of them actually show up on a Sunday morning, in a cathedral that is designed to seat 18,000 people. Can you imagine that? It was built, but nobody comes. Okay, a few come, but for the most part, it was built and nobody comes. That big, empty church in Africa does remind me, actually, quite a bit about this parable that Jesus shares with us today in Matthew's Gospel. In our text, we have this king who's hosting a wedding party. Now, he's not building a big church, but he is building a ginormous wedding party. It's a big banquet. It's sort of the mother of all parties, if you will. And he's throwing it in honor of his children who are being married. And yet, no one wants to come. I mean, it looks like the whole banquet is going to be empty. So what's the message that Jesus is trying to convey here to us? Well, I think we first need to consider who's making the invitation. In this parable, of course, the king is actually God. Jesus is representing the king as God. And the persons being invited are all of us. Whether we be the persons who sort of shunned the whole event or the persons who were drawn in off the streets. That's us, the invitees. The calf has been fattened and slaughtered. The wine has been aged. The tables are set. The DJ and the band have been hired. God's really jazzed. God's really jazzed about this feast. God can't wait to get the invitations out because, God's just that way. That's just the way God is. God is always inviting us to a grand affair. That's the God that we know, the God that we love, the God that we worship and serve, a God who invites us to the dance, invites us to be part of all that God is trying to accomplish in the world. God's made preparations for this feast. God wants everyone to be present to honor His Son and the bride of His Son. And God's not willing for any of us to miss out on that event. So God is also someone, I guess, who goes big or goes home, and God doesn't go home. God keeps at it. God goes big. God's always inviting. Every day of our lives is a new invitation that God gives to each of us. Every interruption that we perceive as an interruption in our lives is probably actually an invitation being made by God to come be part of what God's doing in the world. It's an invitation to abundant life. To miss the party, in God's case, requires that you reject the invitation, because there is no possibility that God has failed to make the invitation to you. Everyone receives an invitation. No matter who you are, no matter who you've been in your life, no matter where you are on your walk with Christ, there's an invitation that's been waiting for you, just waiting for you to seize the opportunity. You're invited. What's surprising, though, is that some of the invitees reject the invitation over and over again. And the king's like, you got to be kidding, right? The invitation might be treated casually by some. And that's really pretty incredible when you stop and think about it. I mean, after all, this is the wedding of the king's son. I mean, it's not just the event of a decade. It's the event of a lifetime. It's huge. And you're honestly going to treat this invitation with nonchalance? Maybe even hostility? Seriously. Are you stupid? Or are you just incredibly stupid? I mean, what could be more important than an invitation to this kind of an event? But there are some who will treat that invitation from God just that way. Some of you might even be among us here this morning. Yet, as those who have been sent out into the world to make that invitation to others on God's behalf, we need to understand that others are not necessarily going to welcome us, to welcome the good news that we have to share with them, to welcome the invitation that we come to deliver to them. What we have is the most important invitation ever to give to others, and yet, by and large, people are going to yawn or perhaps even tell us to go away when we try to deliver it. But that's okay. That's the work that God has given us to do. What happens after that is the work that God does in individuals' lives, or isn't able to accomplish in individuals' lives. It's a crying shame, yet it is, perhaps more than ever before, the reality of the world in which we live these days. But it's important for us as those who deliver such a message to remember that God invites each and every one of us despite our background, that God invites each and every one of us without respect for our level of education, without respect to the amount of money that we have in our bank accounts, without regard to our political affiliation, without regard to our church affiliation, without regard to our race or gender or sexual orientation. So in Africa, there stands this huge cathedral that's virtually empty. You got to wonder if the construction workers who were building that incredible cathedral ever imagined that they were working on a structure that would be just pretty much largely ignored by the world. There were more than 1,500 workers who erected that cathedral on the Ivory Coast, and they did it in only 4 years. St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican in Rome took over 100 years to build. And there are many other cathedrals out there that took even longer than that to build, yet it is virtually ignored. But God's building something for us. God is building a future for us. God is building a present for us. God is inviting us to come to His banquet, to be present in the work that God's doing in the world. So I would suggest that when the RSVP comes, and even though we're not very good at RSVPs anymore these days, I would suggest that we rejoice and heartily accept that invitation when it comes. And I would suggest also that we take that invitation out to all who would have it and celebrate with them. Amen.